I'm representing one of those Weasley freeloading missions that are all like, yeah, descent.
How we doing?
We like need your stuff. No, but also one reason MSL is such a great example of what the DSN does is that because of the distance, we're about 250 million miles away when we land on Mars. Because of the precision, I think Wayne or maybe Audrey talked a little bit about, the precision of trying to put the lander in what was a 20-kilometer ellipse, right, on the surface of Mars. Because of that, and then also the dynamics as we're coming in, the data we wanted to get back. I mean, it could have been that we didn't land successfully, and then whatever we had gotten back from the DSN was the only thing we would have ever gotten from the investment of that mission. So it was super, super critical, the support that we got for the DSN. And of course, oh, by the way, we're still there and it's all working great. So about the call me stuff. I've given some talks on MSL, and people say, well, what's it like? Having this mission. So I've worked on MSL for like 8 years. I actually, I was, as I said, I was the lead flight system engineer, so I was responsible for all the avionics on board the spacecraft, the thermal, the power, the communications, and then I also was one of the deputies for the entry, descent, and landing system as well. So I was very, very involved in the last few years in terms of the entire spacecraft and how we were going to do the landing and what that was going to look like. But then also personally, I was part of the team that built 2 of the radios that are on MSL, 2 of the UHF radios, and I'll tell you a little bit about MSL's kind of dual means of communication. And so it was very satisfying for me to be able to come out here and talk about the communications aspect, which I think is underplayed when people talk about MSL. So go to the next slide. Okay, so everybody's seeing a lot of stuff on Curiosity. I hope you've gone to the website. We've actually got a great Twitter crew at Mars Curiosity that talks about also sort of a counterculture version, the at Sarcastic Rover. Super funny. We enjoy at Sarcastic Rover very much. So she's got a lot of things going on. I mean, you guys have seen some of the science return after only a couple months. We've already driven over half a kilometer. So she's super, super capable, but we depend on the DSN to help get the job done. The analogy I like to make is, you teach a kid, everything you bring them up, and you teach them right from wrong. You teach them how to keep themselves warm, how to keep themselves fed. And then you send them to college, and now they're far away. You assume they're doing well, but unless they call, you can't actually know that. Well, of course, they call, they tweet, they IM, they Facebook, they whatever. But the point is, it has to go through the interwebs, as we like to say. And the DSN is our interwebs. The DSN is what allows Curiosity to keep us always up to date on her status. So, next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about what was in Curiosity, how we do the communications, and then I'm going to focus on 2 of the kind of prime aspects of the mission, landing and then also surface, and how it's this careful dance with the DSN support that we get, and then the kind of things that we want to do during a day, back and forth, back and forth. So here's some pictures of the spacecraft. And you think, wow, those are 3, 4 completely different spacecraft. But this is the transformer view of Curiosity. I apologize, I can't leave the microphone very well. But the thing that you know and love is Curiosity is this thing that the surface down in the bottom right-hand corner. So this is the comm-centric point of view of Curiosity. All the things that you see being pointed to are all the various different antennas that she can use. The radios are buried inside the belly of Curiosity. So for example, when we were in our cruise phase, which is this flying saucer thing up here, we had several antennas that could talk back to the Deep Space Network as we're going through cruise. Generally in cruise, there wasn't a whole lot of things happening. For the first few weeks, we talked to the DSN pretty much every day. Continuously. After that, we'd talk every few days, every couple days, unless we were doing some big event. So it was always very much a coordination. Like for instance, we did a software load partway through cruise that would allow us to be more capable for landing and for early surface. And so that was one of those occasions, we're putting the spacecraft into sort of a sketchy mode, and so we would request from the DSN continuous coverage to be able to make sure that things were happening. And somebody did mention, 10 bits a second. They're like, 10 bits a second? No, our safing mode was, I think, 40 bits a second. So I mean, imagine like a tweet, you know, you get a tweet like every 1 second. Oh, I'm not feeling well. I mean, so it's sort of we actually went into safing at least once during cruise. And, you know, the first thing you see is that the data goes down to something very low. The DSN has to pick it back up again. The data rate goes to something low. And so it's kind of funny. It's sort of like if you're talking to somebody on the phone, and just when you hear a loud screech and a crash and a yelp, they're not talking to you anymore. And you're just like, no. But I mean, there's a very good reason for that. And that's, you see the antennas that are on the spacecraft. The spacecraft could be limping along. There could be something wrong with the computer. The spacecraft could be in a funny attitude, so those antennas aren't pointed back on Earth, say. And so what you want to be able to do is basically just blast up a signal, and that's where the DSN comes in with those big transmitters. You want to be able to blast up a signal and basically shake it out of its stupor and be able to talk to it, and vice versa. If we're not talking that well, if something's wrong with our radio, something like that, we need those big ears on the ground to be able to pick up the signal. And so by dropping the data rate rather, we're able to get a little bit more power into that signal ourselves, and then give the DSN a better chance of being able to find out what we're talking about. So anyway, so cruise stage, then we go into entry. We're still talking to the DSN entry, but here's where we pick up a new capability called relay. So the spacecraft actually has two completely separate sets of communications equipment on board. So one is at X-band, which you'll see the antennas that can support us at X-band. So that's a higher frequency signal. Generally, that gives you a better data rate, except for when you're at very long distances, which of course Curiosity is. You see she's not towing a big dish behind her, that she's not capable of doing that, but you can. Let me just see if I can point. This thing that's called HGA, high gain antenna, that thing is about this big. So this is the antenna that we have to talk to the DSN. When you go outside later and you see the 70-meter antenna, you can see the differential between them. But for surface operations, and when we are close to the planet, we also have these other antennas that operate at UHF, which is low frequency, like 400 megahertz. And what they're specifically supposed to do is be able to talk to the orbiters overhead. So we have a few orbiters at Mars that also carry radios, and these radios point down to Mars, which you might think, well, that's kind of funny, because why would you want to talk to Mars except for the Martians? Why would you want to talk to Mars? And that's because people had this vision, early on, that to get better communications rates back from Mars, especially when you think of not only is Curiosity, well, she's a moose, but she's a small moose compared to being in space. Not only can she not carry large communication equipment with her. I mean, like I said, when you see these antennas, you'll see what I'm talking about. Also, even though we saw for the DSN with the 3 stations around the globe, as the Earth turns, you can see the DSN stations. One will come up as another one's coming down. When we're on the surface of Mars, obviously as Mars rotates, there are some times when you just physically can't see the DSN because the planet's in the way. However, our orbiters that are overhead, they have a better view of the DSN generally. Also, they do have like big solar panels, they can have big transmitters, they can have big antennas because they're not so constrained. They don't have to drag that stuff with them like we do if we had that sort of thing. So Curiosity has the capability to talk directly to the DSN, but she also has the capability to talk to one of the orbiters. Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter is one of those. Mars Odyssey is another one that we regularly talk to. And now actually we just started talking with Mars Express, which I think is a European mission that also has a radio on board that points down. So she's got multiple different ways, just like IM plus tweet plus whatever. She's got multiple different ways to talk back to the ground. But ultimately, obviously, all that does come through the DSN, because even our orbiter partners, they have to be able to see the Earth. They have to be able to get back to the ground as well.